I would rather skew a little bit that way than have too much money or have too much visibility or notoriety, because I think we would lose a lot of the magic that we generate in instances like this podcast.
It's coming back in the morning. It's sleeping right down the hall. Don't ignore me.
Welcome to the Marinade, a free-flowing conversation about the creative process with creative people. Each episode we welcome musicians, actors, comedians, authors, visual artists, filmmakers, anyone who creates art to talk about how and why we make stuff. This is episode 197, and our guest for the second time is Jesse Daniel Edwards. Jesse's a songwriter from California who now makes his home in Nashville. Y'all, he has lived an incredible life. He's gone from growing up without television or internet to leaving home at 16 to tour managing the likes of Jason Isbell, Lucinda Williams, and fucking Morrissey. And then also making unique and fascinating records. And this year, he's released not one, not two, but three wonderful collections of songs, 2 EPs and a full length, and I highly recommend all three of those. This conversation went in so many directions, y'all. I'm grateful for Jesse as a thought partner and for the art that he shares with the world. Everyone, it is my great honor to present my conversation with Jesse Daniel Edwards.
Greetings.
Hello.
Jason, how are you?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. I realized that it has been almost exactly 2 years
2
since
years.
last we spoke.
Isn't that wild? I was just looking at it just now, actually. It's going to be so interesting to talk to you after 2 years because so much has transpired in the world and you've made so much stuff. But like 6 months ago, I got a message from on YouTube from someone whose username is LizBerry81. And they commented on our episode, which at that point was a year and a half old, and said, "What an absolute treat. I've had some time to talk to Jesse, but it's never enough. It's funny, I've heard Jesse on other podcasts, and the host, if not really briefed on the journey she or he is about to go on with him, they end up sort of sputtering. But you were obviously ready. You were obviously ready and primed to receive. Jesse is an absolute trip and so fascinating."
It's a very thoughtful comment.
Right? Yeah, I greatly
On a couple different fronts.
I
It's
felt like,
refreshing.
yeah, I felt like it was a compliment to me and to you and to us together. So, really cool, man. I'm really excited to talk with you again.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a joy then, and I certainly am looking forward to the joy of talking with you now. And that we can go back and listen to that previous episode. And it's interesting, too, that, starting off with just a comment from someone in the digital void who has presumably heard some of this music and follows along. I was talking to someone who works in marketing. And I got to be honest with you, I don't really know what marketing is or does. I mean, I know that, there, 5,000 ads we see a day. And yet, are they just sitting around talking about, well, what color do we make the backdrop of this little cell phone ad? Or, oh, what is the narrative of these characters in this pharmaceutical ad? And so, I guess what I'm saying is I don't, and Jason, if you want me to turn my camera on, I'm more than happy to. I was pushing down my French press, and now I'm set up in the HQ zone. But whatever you're comfortable with, I can
I'd love to have,
accommodate.
if you don't mind, I'd love it, man. Yeah, it's always
Let's do it.
feel like I can connect better if I can see you,
Get the
you know?
face to face.
There you
Hey,
are. Looking fabulous as
yeah.
always.
Bongos never far, never far. Look at that. I
Look
keep
at
it right
that.
there because sometimes you ever find you just need like a little rhythm reset. You just like you go do something, you get back, there's the outer world, there's your home world, and there's the inner world of our brains. And sometimes it's just I went out the other day and just I was getting some bread at the farmer's market and it was so crowded and I was met with such hostility over parking. And I've never gotten a ticket, never gotten an accident. I'm very proud to view myself as a kind driver.
Mm,
I'm trying to let people go. I'm the guy I'm always stopping to let people cross who are walking. No one uses the crosswalk around here. And if there's a nice parking spot, I enjoy giving that away and finding other parking. I go roughly the speed. I never go more than five over the speed limit, and that's if I'm passing. And I don't mean to sound like a square, but I take it pretty seriously. And well, I guess more to the point, my father, he's the one that taught me to drive out in the country. And there wasn't much he could hit out there, but the roads were treacherous because they're kind of windy and there were no street lamps at night. And he was also a fighter pilot when I was younger. So I think all that rolled together in this
mm,
really rigid kind of, ninja style of learning to drive. And so I've really prided myself on being safe and being courteous. But I met with such hostility that day. People were in a rush. And I'm like, I just kind of saw the bigger picture, which I try to always do. Well, I always try to switch it on when I need it. You can't always be looking at the big picture. You miss the small details, right? But
hmm
I was thinking, man, I'm here just buying a loaf of bread, and I can already feel that stress response. I can feel it in the air, and it might be something with some sort of unseen syzygy, just some sort of magnetic pole or gamma ray frequency misalignment. Who knows? But I was like, I saw it, really acknowledged it. I'm like, I just got to keep my head down. I got to get this bread and get in and out of there. And so when I got home, I got kind of just sat down, started breathing, back here in my little corner. And I just sort of thought about it for a moment, but I didn't hold on to it. I just like, sometimes that's the rhythm, but let me just know that I'm back. Let me just a few cycles of that with the bongos, man. And all of a sudden, any pain or hurt or brushing or bruising of ego is gone. You just remember, and it's nothing mystical or even that profound. It's just reminding ourselves who we are. Anyway, now that we're on the camera, what we're saying about this digital void comment, which is awesome. I was talking to these marketing people, and that I finally was able to communicate because I've always been sort of anti-social media. I've always been sort of anti-promotion, in the mainstream sense. It's just I don't like to make a generalization, but my experience with it in that sphere has been so soulless and just morale sucking. And it has nothing to do with making art for me. I mean, I understand that there's a
mm,
business side of it, there's an industry side of it. I'm blessed to have people that want to share my music with the world because if it was up to me, I wouldn't put anything out. I like the active recording for the active recording. There's stuff that's never going to get released, and I'm comfortable with that.
mm,
But I have people that their art is the marketing part, and I've come to understand this is the releasing records part. Which shout out to the label, Cavity Search Records,
hmm
keeping it real since 1990 something. But the marketing team, the kind of bone that they threw me, they said, you you can embrace small internet. It still exists. If one person hears what you do and they leave a comment on one of these podcasts, think of it as you're making a connection, you're making inroads into sharing your music that channel is 1 inch wide and a mile deep and that's okay. That is if anything, that's a pretty nice litmus test if you look around at how ego-centered and how self-centered so much of music has become. And I'm like, okay, I feel like we're speaking the same language. You want to, and this podcast, thank you again for doing what you do, is a prime example. I mean, this is a real human to human channel for discovering and sharing and connecting on things that maybe, and here's the thing, it's a fallacy to think, oh, no one likes what I do. I'm no good. The self-talk, just because you don't have a million TikTok followers. Well,
mm,
guess what? Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe the music that you do has to find its level in these other outlets where people can discover it in a different way. People like, the people commenting on this podcast or YouTube videos or conversations. And I'm actually very proud of that. Look, I don't ever want to be, I don't want to ever want to have too much money or too much notoriety. And I don't know what too much is, but
Mm.
I'm also very grateful that I've never had too little. There have been thin times, there have been times of scraping by. I think a lot of musicians can relate to, there's the game you have on your Instagram. It's like, oh, photo shoot, oh, high contrast, glossy shots, guitar looking cool, looking pensive. Oh, crowd, people apparently enjoying me singing. But then you go home, you're like, yeah, I'm digging through my closet. Like, what can I scrape up to sell at the pawn shop? What can I sell on Facebook Marketplace real quick to get $100? It's like there are plenty of times like that. But I would rather skew a little bit that way than have too much money or have too much visibility or notoriety, because I think we would lose a lot of the magic that we generate in instances like this podcast, in instances like that
Yeah.
comment. That comment goes, that's small internet, baby. That's
Yeah.
not just another thumbs up or an emoji, which is like this simplistic, reductive, glyphic way of communicating. That is very elegant, very sophisticated, very well written comment that took some thought.
Hmm.
And I feel like it feeds into us giving thought to what we do in these conversations or making these records. So I'm really glad that we started off with that. And thank you out there to whoever hears what we do, and including this podcast.
Man, I love everything you just said. I think how'd you phrase it? An inch wide and a mile deep. Like I think that almost unintentionally, that's not true. There's been some intention behind it from my perspective, but that's what I've kind of tried to curate here with the marinade is exactly what you're experiencing and what you experienced the last time we talked, which is like I do want those deeper connections. And a lot of times I've been thinking about this a lot too in terms of tying it to the marketing discussion, because I'm getting more. It's been incremental, right? It's been a slow climb, but I am getting more and more ears and eyes on the show. People are paying more attention. I'm putting more time into it. I just happen to have more time at the moment, and I feel like I'm getting better at it, but at doing this work. And then that's improved. Like people are noticing and they're paying more attention, and so we're slowly starting to grow. And I do have these moments sometimes, and I can't. It's just a human thing where I know of podcasts that are way bigger in terms of reach, that are making, clearly making a lot of money, that I just feel like I'm so much better than. Like, I just think the
Hmm.
work that we do here is more compelling, not because of me, because of the whole thing, right? My guests, the approach that I've taken, the work that I put in, all the whole package. I listen to some people. I try to dabble in just knowing what's out there, right? I want to know what people are making, and there are times there are exceptions, of course. I listen to Pablo Torre Finds Out. That guy is, I mean, that's a different level, right? But in terms of like long form conversation, I don't know, man. I feel like I do as well, if not better than most people at this work, and yet I know my reach isn't quite what some of these bigger names are, and I have to dial it back in and remember that I didn't start out making it to try to make money. I didn't start this thing to try to get any sort of notoriety. I started it because I wanted to connect with people like you whose art I appreciate, and I wanted to know how and why people make the things that they make that move me so much. So I love how you phrase that, because I do feel like our reach is a mile deep, but sometimes it does feel like it's an inch wide.
Well, congratulations on growing and doing so in an awesome way with integrity, and also having the time to focus more on it. Because as you get older with any art or any meaningful pursuit or passion, you realize that time really is the ultimate currency. It's the ultimate premium, not just on a grander scale, of course, the time we have to be alive to go through the bigger arc of our own character, our own wisdom, our own humility, the deeper life stuff. But when it pertains to our career, if that attaches to something that we love, or art in this case, yeah, time, especially with something like music, which is a time-based art. I mean, all art takes time to make, but in music, you're using little bits of time as building blocks, and so you're painting each little one in, and each one has a time stamp. This little horn thing that comes in might be only 3 seconds at the fade out. That's 3 seconds of your life, and that's only if you've done one take and not including mixing, mastering. But that's time that you just for that one little shade, not to mention, writing the song, not how many times we are rehearsing the song or rehearsing with the band. So
Mm.
time, and in the same way that have you ever noticed a lot of sad songs are slower tempo, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of faster songs are higher tempo, or happier songs, or more upbeat, more pop, whatever. It's because when it reflects something that happens psycho emotionally. It's this thing that when we feel sad or we feel depressed or something bad has happened to us, we really go inward and we look at it and it feels like time stops. We're frozen in this moment of grieving or self-doubt or sadness or hurt. But then when you're having a good time, yeah, you're playing pickleball, whatever. You're drinking a couple naughty ice, so, and
Sounds like a wonderful day.
but the time just dissipates. The time goes by a whole afternoon. You're just like, whoa, how long have we been playing? 6 hours? Whoa, okay. And music reflects that a little bit because it has the ability to change our perception of time.
Mm.
And when you're making the music, you're somewhat aware of that happening, even though traditionally, in modern day popish or most modern music, everything blues later, which incorporates most of it. That's as you're making that music, you're kind of aware of that, but y- you're also not. You're also suspending your own sort of disbelief because you have to get in the nuts and bolts of it, which I think ties into why it's hard to unhear that when you just listen to music, not even recreationally, but just outside of making it. But then you're kind of aware that, okay, well, yeah, you kind of naturally fall within this 2 to kind of, let's call it generously, 5 minute time, and that's your canvas. So yeah, I think that's again that kind of ties into what we were saying when we started out, this kind of idea of tempo. And
Mm.
actually, tempo has a lot to do with things being popular as well. I mean, it's too tempting to say, oh, if you listen to the radio, but the radio has become sort of outmoded. But I mean, if you listen to most music that's popular, um, the tempo is a huge part of it. The slow songs are very clearly in their lane as ballads. That's just all there is to it. Everything is sort of mid-tempo and above. And I want to read this to you because this is actually the field of trade publishing. But check this out. This was written mid 2000s. It's Merchants of Culture, very cool book by John B. Thompson. But he talks about this towards the end in a chapter entitled "The Digital Revolution." He's talking about trade publishing. These old things, books. I don't know if I put this next to the microphone, people can hear the pages. But he says regarding trade publishing, because they're talking about Amazon and ebooks and things like that. And back when this was written, which was only I think 10 years ago or so, they didn't have any idea what that would do. And we're now on the other side of that. But he says, uh, however, this plays out in terms of the reconfiguration of the creative industries, a major devaluing of intellectual property and a constant driving down of the price of content is unlikely to lead to an overall increase in the quality of content over time. And I think that just so sums up
Mm.
what we're talking about, as far as, it's kind of a common one, just the fact that all of these pop songs are just, there's just that much difference in tempo, because
Mm.
decided, or even it tied back into that kind of that physiological response that we're just talking about mood and about energy, about experience, having a tempo, even back to the bongo thing. There's a tempo to it all. But the fact that it's dumbing down where they're only selling us plastic stuff that's bubblegum pop at a certain tempo, that's that devaluing, that's that dumbing down. But it's cyclical, because then what happens is that is what's invested, that's what saturates the market. So therefore that's what becomes popular in the market. And it edges out things that are doing things at a different tempo. Things like a podcast where you're going a little bit deeper. The fact that we're talking about this record is not doesn't fit any doesn't tick any boxes about what's popular. Tempo, theme. I mean, none of it aligns with the current model of being popular. So it'd be wrong of me then to be like, gosh, I can't believe that it's not a runaway Spotify success. If that's almost impossible, and that really would be a runaway success. But if you look at it realistically, you realize no, because that's more of that channel that's a million miles wide, but only an inch deep. People don't
Mm.
want to get challenged with a tempo that that you can't just do this to, or you can't crank up while you're, sipping a White Claw, playing sand volleyball, and I hate to reduce it down to such a saccharine reality, but I think that's what it is. And I think it's smart on one hand. We live in a very, all this music is driven by, you know, capitalistic corporate America. That's what's driving the music industry in our times. And really, again, since the blues onward, and even the taking of the blues from the black community and sort of making it, you know, selling it to white people and putting that spin on it. That was like, that kind of took that piece of culture, turned into a very popular commodity, and now look at what it's become. Just a couple generations later.
Hmm.
But it would be if I got to thinking, oh well, you know, but and when people try to make music that you know is trying to follow that trend. I mean, you're already behind the curve, but you're just trying to get a piece of that pie. You're just like, well, if I do something of this tempo, and yes, there's all these other things I could explore in my life, and this isn't a comparison of me or other artists. It's just an observation of songwriting, certainly as I've seen it here in Nashville. You start thinking, well, gosh, I guess I should write and record in this tempo, and these are the themes that seem popular. And before you know it, you've never even gotten to delve deeper into your own experience, your own story, your own music, and maybe, I mean, think about how grand and how diverse the world of music is when it comes to something like tempo, like we're talking about. I mean, or a time signature. I mean, how many pop songs do you hear in 3/4 or 6/8? And it changes trend to trend, decade to decade. You might have heard things in 6/8 in the doo-wop era, but that's now, now largely because of hip hop and rap. We don't hear that. It's hard to rap in 3/4, so that's where that comes from in our modern pop sort of firmament. But these marketing teams got together and they realized, and this is where I think it was pretty, I don't even want to say nefarious, but certainly very calculated, or certainly when it became successful, but certainly very intelligent if you want to make money. I mean,
Hmm.
let's not challenge people because that's going to make people uncomfortable. Let's feed people hummingbird water, sugar water, so they keep having to come back. But they're gonna, that one little neuron that's just the dopamine hit of happy, happy, happy. Little bit of rise of, oh, the challenge. Oh, she doesn't love me anymore. Oh, but it's okay. By the end of the song, you notice they never leave anything open ended. Every single pop song, it's got this very predictable closed loop. At the end, you're allowed to go back to your reality. It's the same thing with a lot of Netflix shows, or a lot of the Marvel universe, all that stuff. It's just it's aiming at one little dopamine hit, and then we just go and we feed, and it gets to the point, like in that quote from that book, where especially after a couple decades go by, it's that becomes popular. That becomes the landscape. That people adapt to that modality. And so then when they go on, Spotify, wherever they listen to music, and they hear something that's not that, it's challenging, and
Hmm.
they don't want to like it. They don't want to, not that we buy it. They don't want to buy it. They don't want to go to see it live. They just like, gosh, this doesn't sound like Sabrina Carpenter to me. This is too aggressive. This is too slow. This is too sad. And that's just the day and age we live in. But if I got upset by that, or if I tried to, for me, and this is the type of artist I am, if I tried to mold myself to try to, you know, play music and write music to what I perceive as those popular trends, just to make money, or just to buy into that narrative of oh wow, let's just make easy music. I I I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't. That wouldn't be a way to live. It wouldn't be a way to create art. It wouldn't be a way to make a career. And quite frankly, from what I've seen, it's not very fun. And here's why:
Hmm.
you're only serving yourself, and you're only serving the dollar. You're only serving your own ego. That is about as lifeless as just living off that diet of hummingbird juice. It's there's way more than that, and we all, I think deep down, we all have the receptors. We all have the little, inverted receptors to understand that and to integrate and to connect with those experiences at every level, as music makers, as music partakers. But it's gotten harder than ever to breach through the noise, and they don't want us to breach through the noise. It's hard to breach through the noise. You're getting edged out by podcasts that are, quite frankly, not doing it as well,
Hmm.
because it probably hits that dopamine thing. It fits within that larger narrative of that they want. That's popular. It's a self self-serving cycle in the creative industries, and it's driven by money. It's driven by capitalist greed, basically.
Well, and also, I've been thinking a lot lately about sort of the the moral question of the things that you make and put out into the world and how they then influence people's behavior. Because if we're
Mm.
all getting the hummingbird water, the consequences of our art being so uniform and so just based on a dopamine hit have larger societal reach. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and this might take us into having a conversation about the Requiem Mass EP a little bit too, and some things that you just
Eventually, we'll
talked
talk about
about.
the rest.
I know,
Yeah.
right? I know, yeah. I kind of
My
figured.
first manager told me that. He said, "Look, the most interesting interviews where you don't talk about the
Yeah.
record."
Well, that it's my job to just bring it back for 2 seconds so that all the publicists and managers still hire me to do this, right? So line me up, and then we can go on our tangent, okay? So let's feed
I'm with
the
you.
let's feed the publicists and managers and keep them happy real quick, which is, but I think it does tie into what you were saying, which is and what's on the record too, which is I've been thinking a lot about my own fears and really processing them and dealing with them, especially as I'm on the other side of 40 and I'm thinking about my mortality in different ways, and my parents are getting older, and just had a huge health scare with mom. She's doing a lot better, but
Oh my
like
gosh,
just
glad
like
to
really,
hear.
yeah, thank you. Just a lot of stressful stuff though,
Scary.
right? And like needing
Hmm.
to sort of process it in a way that is healthy and that it's not stifling to me and the things I need to do in my life. And I'm balancing it pretty well, I think. But one thing hit me really hard recently. I went on a road trip. I go on my grounded summer tour every summer. I try to get back to my roots. I go up to Appalachia. I cover Bonnaroo. I try to get to Kentucky, which I had to cut short this time. But um, I listen to the radio a lot when I go on road trips, and because I'm interested in what is being fed to people in different parts of the country. And I'm interested also in, are there, because there are like Lightning 100 in Nashville. There's some great radio stations. The Creek and Macon, Georgia, I just discovered is a fantastic radio
Oh,
station. Yeah, it was such a
lot
delight.
of Bible radio out here in the South. Am I
The-
right?
Almost every fucking station, dude. It's a
Yeah.
conservative.
Yeah.
It's a conservative talk show, or it's the Bible, and now
Uh,
they're blurred so much that it's hard to, you don't know which one's which. And the thing that kept happening, and I'm noticing more and more, especially as I'm processing my mortality and my parents' mortality, is how many healthcare related
mm,
uh, ads you're hit with. And I know this has been a thing for a long time, but man, it is epidemic in my mind. And if you have any sort of, I'm noticing that like because of my own fear of mortality and the way I
mhm,
process it, that it's heightened when I'm getting these messages and they're everywhere.
mm,
And as I get older, and then they're marketing it more to me, right? And then they're like, well, this guy's an old now,
yeah.
so he must need
And
all
they
these
and they've
drugs.
well, and they've hacked our brains. They know more about how you feel at your age, maybe than we do ourselves. And when it comes to how we buy and all that back end, all that data that they're pouring over. How long did he look at this? How many clicks did it take to get to this? What did he
Hmm.
buy last? I mean, they know exactly what we're going to do. They've got us hacked, and it goes back to that marketing conversation of they take that data and they basically exploit it, and they basically find a way that when you're in that at every tier as well, they know how to sell you cigarettes. They know how not to sell you cigarettes and to sell you some other nicotine pouch. They know how to sell you uh, pills. They know how to for restless leg syndrome. They know how to sell you, a butt lift. I mean, they can sell you anything, and they do. And as hard as we work here just to keep up, as things have gotten certainly more expensive in this economy, and certainly in cities like Nashville, you know, it feels like theft in a way, especially the way that your phone's
Hmm.
listening, you're scrolling, you see ads. It's just so easy to when was the last time we saw a handful of real money? It's all just so easy to just zip, and then it just shows up on your doorstep, and it's like, I mean, it's become almost grotesque how easy it is to spend that money. But it all comes down to this marketing thing, and yeah, it's like if someone says, "Hey, uh, you know, yellow Camaro. I mean, you and I are going to go out and we're going to see one. We're going to be very aware of that. It's like you have
Hmm.
these things that go on in your life, which are statistically probable as we get older, and all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, that ad's they're really speaking to me, and before you know it, uh, you're hooked on. My dad was saying he's got 20 prescriptions he's been prescribed, 20 pills he's got to take every day just to keep doing his job.
It is that's what one of the revelations from spending time with my parents with this health thing is I learned what they take, specifically what my mother
Mm,
takes, and without airing too much of her business, it was shocking to me.
hmm.
And so that is now I'm trying to, because I don't take anything. I take two naturals. I'm fortunate. I've been healthy my whole life. I exercise regularly. I drink too much and too often, but not to the point where it's that crazy. But other than that, I eat well, I exercise, for the most part. I've been so scared to die. I take really fucking good care of myself. So I
You've
don't,
reached enlightenment. It's you've reached perfect balance.
it's a pretty good life, but I don't take any prescriptions. And even though I live with generalized anxiety, I found natural ways to keep it at bay
Hmm.
and to process it. And so it was jarring to me to see that, and then to have conversations with not only my parents but other people in my life as I'm trying to like reach out for guidance as to how to sort of process what's going on with my parents, is that it shocked me how much people are dependent on pharmaceuticals. We hear that we see, of course, I've read the articles, I've seen the headlines, I know about the opioid crisis. I've lost
Hmm.
people to it, close to me, of course,
Yeah.
right? Like I get that, but just processing like how many benzodiazepines people take and how often they take them and how they're dependent on them. And that again, to tie it back to art, like I think so often we are, as a society, looking for an escape from the horror that we perceive as our existence, especially right now with
Mm,
the messages that we're constantly sent. And I do think there's a responsibility of an artist
hmm.
to dive into some of this shit, to get in the weeds a little bit and
That's powerful. Yeah. I mean, well, we live in a profitless, as in profits, not financial profits or gain, but a profit. We live in an age largely without poets and prophets.
Mhm.
There's just no space. There's no real estate for them to set up shop. I mean, it's too distracting, and we've been groomed and bred for other purposes and fed that hummingbird juice. So I love this word responsibility. I don't think I don't I mean even these top people at the pop, the top of the pops, that have they ever looked in the mirror and said, with all these fans and all this money, I'm getting out shaking my tush every night. What is my responsibility to myself, to the planet, to these people, to art, to the craft? And it just shows you how big of an industry it's become. And at risk of sounding like someone who's just never had enough cheese to bite on, and so having to kind of make my peace with it and make the best of it. I will say, I've had chances to do it other ways, and I've turned away from it,
Mm.
consciously, semi-consciously. And it's kind of when you watch a bloodhound and they're onto a scent, it's this invisible trail that's taking them all around the yard, and you're like, what is that pooch up to? What are they? But then they zero in on that dead squirrel. They snuffle under there, and they pull that thing out by its ratty ass, revolting, petrified tail. And that I've always felt that way about music. I've never, I wish that there was just a completely, that there was a moneyless. I mean, it's become a moneyless industry, but I wish it was just, all public domain, all free form, all freely available. I just think it would cloud the issue a lot less. For me, I've just always been more uh, intrigued by, compelled by, and curious about just what it is without having to turn it into a product.
Mm.
And part of that, and I, I'm trying to, yeah, I'm hearing what you're saying. I'm like, that was a feeling of responsibility. It was a feeling, and it was nothing, inflated or delusional of needing to change the world or needing to, influence how people thought or how they felt, or it was more about just the exploration. It was more about keeping it true, whatever that meant. And I'm not doing anything that's that avant-garde, that's way out there. like I'm not. I've tried, I have some private recordings of my own, like doing just weird stuff, but it's outside the realm of what is almost musical, at least for now. Some of that stuff, but
Mm.
like if you listen to Eliane Radiga, she was an early French synthesizer kind of pioneer and music pioneer. She was doing this really, really subtle, beautiful stuff, and it just went. And this was back then; it went over people's heads, and probably still does. I'm not even doing anything that's, I think, pushing any margins that far as sonically or anything like that, poetically, whatever, production wise. Well, I've had some pretty rough productions put out there, but it did feel like there was a responsibility, and it goes back to my parents were not, they prided themselves on being sort of radical outside thinkers. They pride themselves on thinking for themselves, questioning everything. I mean, that was the rule. That was the general rule of thumb is no matter what it is, question it. So we didn't have TV, we didn't eat fast food, we didn't have video games, we weren't allowed to listen to mainstream music, we weren't allowed to watch Disney, any of that stuff. We didn't celebrate Christmas. I mean, it was all this, I mean, it was extreme. As a child, it was all we knew. But I realize now that, they saw maybe some part of this, and this was back in the early 90s, but they saw maybe this tidal wave to come and they kind of withdrew from it and they sort of implanted and imparted that in us. And I've just kind of tried to honor that and keep going with that. But I'm very grateful for that I had the environment, the ability and support to question it and to go out and you know I think back. I don't think anyone goes in. Well, actually, maybe now people do. You think, oh, wow, I'm gonna make some money. I'm gonna get some ads on my YouTube. I'm gonna make some pop music in GarageBand. Maybe that is, people do look at that as a viable, like being a rock star game developer or something. But when I was growing up, there were seven of us kids. You knew pretty early on that if you wanted to go and survive, you're going to be on your own. There wasn't money at home to get you set up. So whatever it was, and you had the full love and blessing of the parents to go do that. And in fact, that was what they expected. But it was very much understanding of, okay, I'm going out on my own. It's just going to be me. And and it was that was at the time too of the big narrative was go to school, get a job, which I think has been sort of debunked.
Yeah.
And you had what ended up happening is you had a lot of foreign students coming over and really utilizing the United States education system, but you had a lot of American citizens who just sort of used it or came into it with this kind of sense of entitlement, and they got all this kind of middle management, kind of early tech, all that stuff, and but not really ever learning the value of work ethic beyond that. Because it was always about money. It was always about placating and serving the essentially the economy, but the working space, the working environment, the corporate. I mean, it's been so much so that there's so many great send up shows, that lampooning it, like The Office, things. I mean, it became such a parody,
Yeah.
but it left a lot of, trade jobs, menial jobs. A lot of that was just unaccounted for, and so my entire generation, I don't know if they know how to change a tire, mow a lawn. It's just it didn't, the goal then was like go and try to get $85,000 a year, working in a cubicle somewhere, and then you'll be quote unquote happy. Then it will all have come, to the fore of the rate, the education system and getting the degree and the debt and the whole life. That was what we were sold. And when it didn't work out, as we found out, 15, 20 years later, as we found out, oh, that wasn't a very good model. It kind of crumbled society on kind of two different ends and just left us stranded in the middle. You do kind of think, wow, it was because we were never able to question or be curious about any of that stuff. And well, in my case, as I mentioned, we kind of were, but I knew that I didn't want to go that route. And I knew that I wasn't afraid of hard work. I had a job from age 13 on. I've always found ways to survive and make money, enough. Don't ever want too much or too little. Just trying to get enough, just shooting for bare minimum, basically, so that the time thing, as aforementioned, can remain free enough. And it's not even about the time, but how the energy ties into that time. You might you might be, working just a regular job, making a bunch of money, but if that's taking up all your energy, then when you do have the time, you don't have any energy to put
Mhm.
into creating or to anything like that. So it's this very subtle balance, kind of what we're talking about with your lifestyle. It's like it sounds like you've attained balance, and it shows, it's evident, and it's rare. So when I was striking out, I was like, okay, well, I don't know, but I will tell you, even back then, I knew, and it was very obvious. Even back then, with a completely different model of the music industry, it was like, well, if I've always loved playing music. My mom always said it was a gift. I grew up believing that. In lieu of other forms of entertainment or distraction or engagement, I played music a lot growing up because that's all there was, that chores. But when I left home at 16, I was very aware that okay, this is not going to ever probably make me any money, and it's probably going to be difficult to live.
Mm.
And my parents, they knew. I mean, we all, none of us. It was kind of even pre-internet. None of us knew what the music industry was back then. Like I said, totally different model. Anyway, we didn't know what that was. But I knew nothing about really being in a band, putting on shows, making recordings. I knew nothing. I just knew how to, I knew I had my guitar and the piano. I knew I loved to sing and play. That's all I knew. With the concrete, without the shadow of a doubt, that's what I knew. But we all could guess. It's like, okay, if you're going down this road, that's like being a painter. That's like being a poet. There's yes, but
Uh-oh.
the priorities that I keep exploring, the responsibility I have to the gifts, to how I was raised, to just my time being alive, as far as I can tell at age 16, my responsibility is I got to see this through. I got to at least explore this. I can't, right? That was the part I might have been like, well, maybe I'll go to college. Maybe I'll get a job. Maybe I'll work in trades. But back then it was like, well, if the only smart thing to do is to follow what I know I feel, which is to continue on this journey of honoring and sharing this gift.
Mm.
And on the other side of that, decades later, I'm able to look back, and this may be the first time I've kind of reflected. You kind of mentioned, kind of as we get older, this period of reflection, and I'm letting it come to me, and it's coming to me right now, and I'm thinking, wow, touching base, 16-year-old self. It's like, how do you feel about that decision now? In a lot of ways, it was harder than I could have imagined. I like to think that if I could travel back in time and tell myself how hard it was going to be, like the details, like the nitty gritty, like okay, when you're this old, this is going to happen. It's going to be freaking almost insurmountable. That's how hard it's going to be. Or you're going to be sleeping in your car. You're going to be sleeping on a park bench. All that stuff. All stuff I've done in the pursuit. The drive, the urge, the psychosis, the responsibility, all of it together, pushing me to just do the thing that wasn't smart, wasn't going to pay any bills. And it has always been weird. I had no access to good music or to pop music or any music except this kind of what was filtered through my parents. So I had weird influences. I make weird music and I see things in a weird way, all just because of who I am, the nature and nurture thing. And if I could go back and tell myself all that, I'd like to think that I would still be like, fuck it, let's just carry on. I mean, in a way, it's kind of encouraging because at least I kind of am guessing it's going to be hard. It's a little daunting. It's harder than I could imagine, but maybe I would have had the foresight, well, I'm only 16. I don't really know, my perspective is very limited about everything. It's like, let's just go ahead and, but I think more to the point, I think that if I heard these records now and not, at risk of being too comparative about everything, which it's as an indie person, it's easy to do because you see two realities. As soon as I get my car and drive down the street, I'm back in like the big glitz world of like, whoa, everyone's making more money and more successful in every way than me. Just this little garage musician who's still grinding away. But that's a erroneous view of the situation because even without the comparison, if I went and even knowing without knowing what had happened to the music industry in the years, from when I left home at 16 to now, if I could just hear these records or even just a 30-second preview of some of the songs, across some of the records, I would be like, it's definitely worth it, no matter how hard it's going to be, no matter what happens or how successful or popular, no matter what happens in the greater trends of society or the world or music, it's worth it. Whatever it's going to take to live the life where I can make those records, that's worth it. And only I can say what that worth is. It's not attached to any amount of streaming or any money coming into your bank account. Only you have the power to say what that's worth. And that is ultimately, I think, what success is as an artist. And you're going to struggle with it. You're not always going to feel that way about it. You're not even always going to like it, you know?
Hmm.
And that's part of it. That's part of what you got to contend with. That's just one of the things hold on a sec. So yeah, that's just one of the things that you have to roll into it with everything else. Okay. There's not going to be that much money. Uh, People aren't always going to understand it or probably not going to like it. You yourself are going to doubt it for those reasons and your own internal reasons. And on top of that, you may not even be sure that it's any good. that notwithstanding, even other people's opinions, you might just have to accept how subjective music is and how relative it is, and you might just have to accept that you're going to make this great record. You're going to love it. You're going to love every part of making it. 2 months are going to go by. 2 years are going to go by. You're going to hear it again, and you think it's awful. And it's just, and in both cases, your perception about the music is essentially correct.
Mm.
It is the most great. It's the greatest thing you'll ever make, and it's also just like you can't believe that you released it, and it just sounds terrible. Both are accurate, and that's just another thing that you have to contend with. And in this case of this record, well, and it hits you at different times. It's like when you have a cup of coffee or a cup of nice wine. At different times as you're drinking it, you're gonna have a different relationship to that experience. And I don't know, but when the red light is on and you're recording, that's the moment where you're kind of committing to putting your hands in the wet cement because you have to just be like, in this moment, it's the best that I can do. It's just a snapshot. I know it's all going to change in relation. I mean, God forbid, in 10 years they listen back to this and they think, wow, these guys were bigots. They were racist. They were idiots. They were, but I mean, we don't know how, and all you can do is the best in the moment to be as kind and as true to yourself and as true to honoring the best parts of how you were raised and the best parts about your society, the best parts about being human, our nature. That's all you can really do. And with music, it's a snapshot of one part of what you have to say about all of that in 10 songs on an album.
Man, I love so much you said there. I really like the reflection of thinking about what your 16-year-old self might say or what you might say to your 16-year-old self about the path that you've chosen. Because I think that's an interesting. I think about that a fair amount, and I guess like less
Mm,
in a more charitable way these days. I'm a lot more. I'm working on being much more patient and kind to myself when I look back at I was
mm,
just reflecting today on something that happened not even a year ago. It was just a moment when I wasn't at my best. And
hmm
I
Yeah,
can look back at
I'm
that
right there with
moment.
you.
Yeah. But I can look back at that and go like, okay, you weren't at your best. And if faced with a similar situation, you're going to do better next time. But it doesn't do you a whole lot of good to beat yourself up about it. You apologize in the moment and you corrected the behavior. And that's pretty cool, right? Like you're gonna mess up and you're
Man, I've
giving
been doing
yourself
that
grace.
too. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we're about the same age, and I do the same thing because and it's kind of this relieving feeling of knowing that there's not even anything you need to learn from it because you already know the lesson, but
Mm.
it's a slip up or it's a moment of just whatever weakness or a moment of just not being your best for whatever reason. But it's this grace thing of just being like, you know what? That's okay. You've learned this lesson. You don't do this every time anymore, not like when you were 22.
Yeah.
And furthermore, it's just even this moment of failure is just another reminder in all future instances of a similar situation where you are just a little stronger in remembering what to do, how you want to do it, how to be that better version. And I've been dealing with this a lot, and it's just there's something healing about just the grace enactment without because when I was younger, it always felt like there was a lesson, and a lot of times there were, and a lot of times same lesson over and over again, like bashing my head into a brick wall and just like not getting it until I just grew up and matured enough. I was like, there's something I could have even done, and by me trying to do it right, oftentimes I was making it worse. But now it's just the enactment of the salve of grace all of a sudden becomes this beautiful thing that we're giving to ourselves and receiving for ourselves. And yeah, and it goes across time. I feel that way about my 16-year-old self. I feel like he can feel that way about me. It's opened this bridge, of internal communications across time and across just the landscape of experience then and now. And I think, this sense of responsibility, I mean, think about the alternative. I mean, I think that we would still hope, and I think these decisions tie into one another. If I had taken a different path, maybe it'd be harder for me to find the grace. Maybe
Mhm.
by living true to ourselves and living unconventionally, we've left more room for grace in this, certainly in this society, certainly in this day and age. Maybe. Anyway, I digress. But if I had looked, if I had traveled back to my 16-year-old self and I said, you leave home, but you don't really take to it. It gets discouraging, and it's okay. You always knew it was going to be, and eventually you find your way into some other thing, and again, not a judgment or critique or a comparison, but you find yourself in you get into real estate, you make a lot of money, you get lucky, you get a couple lucky breaks, you you move to Nashville early on, you start snapping up the poor neighborhoods and for, buying little shotgun shacks for 35K and flipping them for two tall and skinnies for 750 a piece. You're part of that gold rush and you make so much money, you don't even know where to store it all. You got all these nice cars. Yeah, you got a little life and everything. Uh, yeah, but you kind of just gave up playing music. You never play. You don't really even know if you remember how to connect. I mean, even the mechanics, but connecting with the music, the feel, that's severed. And you can't just lay hold of that thing anymore. And I don't know, for you don't really have an outlet. You work all the time. Yeah, you're pretty stressed, but you feel it's worth it because you have nice things um and you kind of always do wonder, like, wow, what if I could I live without all this? What if I had just kept following the guitar? What if I just kept playing? Sometimes you look favorably on a buster and you put a $5 bill in there and you feel pretty good about yourself. And there's a moment of sort of recognition and melancholy, and you think, wow, would I? And you don't even use the H word because happiness is a complex issue the older you get. But you
Mm.
say, would you have been better off? Would you have been more fulfilled? Would it have been more meaningful even if you had just ended up on a street corner with an acoustic guitar, you know, in playing for pocket change? And you'll always wonder. You can never outlive the wonder. You can never go beyond or get past the what if in this case. And it doesn't work the way around. I'm not thinking, wow, what if I had a bunch of money and what if I got in a real estate? I don't really care about that.
Mm.
I don't worry about that. But the longing that you would feel by turning your back on that responsibility, on that gift, on gosh, in this case, on the way that my mom, who was my biggest champion, when she was alive and when I was growing up, turning my back, like you're never going to get out from under the shadow of wondering, for better or for worse, what if?
Yeah. Well, and I think the couple things you said in there, one of which is like that being true to yourself and tying that to the concept of grace. I think it was difficult
Hmm.
for me to give myself grace at times when I wasn't being true to myself because it took me a long time. I was kind of raised in the system, and because I was a white heterosexual cisgendered guy in the South, I was very much taught not only within my family but by society that like this was my world and like I was supposed to be in charge of it, and I was, like and that I would go to school, which I did, and graduate, which I did, and then the job would just be right there and I'd make the good money, which I didn't. And a lot of that, the
Mm,
reason why I didn't was more because I can look back now and go, I wasn't being true to myself. I was a creative. I did need to
mm,
be out there making things. I did need to, but this is the world I lived in didn't encourage that. I got validation from following the system and doing the things that I was expected to do, going to law school and all these sort of things that were just sort of predestined, right, by
mm,
the pressures around me. And that wasn't who I was. And it's only
mm.
later on now that I'm able to give that guy grace because I realize that he wasn't being true to himself in large part because of the pressures of the society that he was raised in, you know?
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the South because I mean, in a context, the South has its own particular pressures in a way that maybe other parts of the country don't, as far as I have come to know in my travels. And there's two generations that I think sort of labored under that sort of trajectory and that sort of pressure and that sort of story. And it says more about our economy than and more about our government, than it does. But like then you look at the music industry, kind of as we're extrapolating here, you kind of look at the music industry, and it's almost predictable that it became what it has become because and entertainment because we think about it, we weren't that was what those masses needed. That was the kind of input that's the only thing that we could relate to probably in that in the picture you've just painted. There's not time to do anything else. There's not energy to do anything else. We're not being encouraged to do anything. There aren't outlets or channels for anything else because it's a whole generation of people that have gotten used to putting aside the why, putting
Mm.
aside the wonder, putting aside the curiosity, putting aside our imaginations, quite frankly. I mean, it's taught to us so young that it physically shapes our brain material to put aside our imaginations. And it's and nowadays, they did this thing where they show the brain activity when you're reading a book versus when you're watching a show. And obviously, not all books or all shows are created equal, but generally, you're just engaged with different neural activity when you're reading a book. It's interactive, you're engaging, it takes more time, your imagination is activated. When you're watching a show, your brain is basically on autopilot, it's basically on mush mode,
Hmm.
And think, okay, so yeah, you watch, you go to and obviously I'm not talking about the art form of film necessarily, or as it pertains to television. There's a lot of great stuff out there, but there's so much that reflects kind of what we're talking about with the saccharine sort of dumbing down of our society. But you kind of extract that out across two generations. I mean, yeah, it's no wonder these people were never allowed to imagine. They were from a very young age, they were taught to set that aside, focus on the money, focus on, whatever that version of America, whatever that version of happiness is, and here's how you get it. And this is the only way to do it. There's no room outside of that, and I think there are some benefits, with technology, uh, at risk of sounding like a complete Luddite. I'm not anti-technology, but I think our relationship has been unchecked and I think needs to be reevaluated. The technological innovations now make it easier for people to, and this is where Gen Z I think is being tested and I think is coming out on top. My youngest brother's a Gen Z guy.
Hmm.
Shout out to Julian. He just moved to Brooklyn a couple weeks ago. And keeping with the Edwards tradition, but also in the Gen Z thing, where I think they're reevaluating, they realize that they don't have to be victim to what we were when it comes to devices, when it comes to the narrative. The narrative is also changing because people our age are realizing, hey, that didn't work out so well on a lot of
Hmm.
different fronts.
Hmm.
And think about what our generation has imbibed. The big pharma stuff, the big tech stuff, COVID. I mean, we've seen all of that, and certainly the go to school, get a job narrative. We've seen the workplace. We've seen we lived through the recession. We lived through 9/11. The school shootings went from, I remember the first time we heard about it at Columbine to now it's like every week. We've lived through all that. And we say, hey, a lot of this isn't working. And we kind of have a pretty good idea why. Gen Z's coming along and being like, oh, okay, let's use that. Let's take the meat, spit out the bones. And they're using technology and they're using social media in ways that we didn't. And they're using it to be creative. And I feel like it's stimulating. Yeah, and it's indomitable, the human spirit, and that includes the human imagination. It's not like it went dormant in our society, in my opinion, at large scale. But it cannot be defeated. It cannot be crushed or withered away. And what we're seeing is that with the younger kids now that have seen how gross the internet can be and how gross that lifestyle can be, how failed the economy thing has been with the school thing and all that other stuff. I think that they're seeing that they can use things like social media as part of a creative outlet and part of the why, part of the wonder, part and the imagination. If you look at the original movies, if you look at the way these kids are, my brother's in fashion, he makes clothes. If you look at the way that they're using that in a much more studied and much more careful and cautious and healthy way with outlets like social media, you see that it's gotten more imaginative. The music's getting more imaginative again. So I feel like, we've sludged through a lot of it. And I think we're due for a low key, kind of slow build, groundswell revolution of soul in this country and through the arts, and it'll ripple into society. And we had to suffer our bit so that the younger people could come along and see how the parts that sucked really sucked, but they saw that there were good parts too. And I feel like they're building on that. I feel like we're avoiding the Terminator 2 version of reality, and we're going a little bit more towards like a Walt, the original Walt Disney, his Tomorrowland and all that, OG Disney stuff,
Uh-huh.
where it's like it's full of wonder, it's full of life, and it's living in harmony with gadgets and technology, not being enslaved to them or being completely reliant upon them for every single thing, from telling your refrigerator to, turn itself on, these smart refrigerators, man.
I know. I was just reading an article about how much data your refrigerator has on you, and it's fucking
Yeah.
terrifying.
And guess what? They're selling it overseas on the black market and they're somehow
Fucking
finding a way to
crazy,
turn this into
man.
ad revenue.
It's crazy.
I
Well,
got I got my smart coffee cup here. It's telling me I'm drinking too much coffee, man.
I agree. I very much agree with you about Gen Z. Like, I spend a fair amount of time with the group of people who are now in their mid 20s and
Yeah.
like early to mid 20s. There's just a lot of them
Hmm.
in
It's my
my
brother.
neighborhood, and I've just gotten know a lot of them. And then that group of now adults, that group of people were among my first seventh grade students. Not directly, but like that
Oh,
generation was the first group of seventh graders that I ever taught back in like
wow.
2012, 2013.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of
Pretty
wild, right?
pretty important age, seventh grade.
It is. Yeah, it's my favorite grade to teach.
Wow.
Yeah. But
Cool.
I just find them to be so cool. That you mentioned
Yeah.
fashion, their fashion sense is cool. They took all the best parts of our fashion
Yeah.
growing up and left the worst parts. And
It's like grungy and punky, but clean. Like,
yeah, it's great. They look so cool. Their taste in
yeah.
music is
Yeah.
cool. They're really into like old
Yes.
camcorders and like
I know. Yeah. That's my brother to a
film
T. You're
and
describing my brother to a T right now.
yeah, they're great. The only thing that I
Isn't that
worry about,
cool?
it's great. The one thing that I worry about with them is like, what does their political class look like, and what does sort of their leadership look like? That's my only question,
Mm,
because I think culturally they're so badass, but I haven't necessarily
yeah.
seen a ton of evidence of the ability at least to communicate with their political class. And I don't know what that looks like, and I may be off base about it, but that's just been my
I
observation.
think you're right on. My dad was saying the same thing about my brother. He's like, I don't even think he's apolitical. I think he just is completely ignorant
Yeah.
that politics exist.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
I
No,
do
that's
worry
a really
about
good
that.
point. But there's a cool article on the BBC, I think it was, about how Gen Z's just now breaking into the housing market. Totally wild. But
Mm.
I guarantee they're going to start becoming a little bit more apprised of political things when it comes to taxes and homeowner stuff as homeowners.
Yeah, yeah.
That's where the rubber meets the road. But no,
Yeah.
that's a really good point actually, because they've had a pretty, whatever you think or believe politically, they've had a pretty wild ride politically. If you think
Yes.
about the last however many cycles, not just presidential, but just the swing of the pendulum from, I mean, that pendulum has been swinging further and further to both sides. And most people find themselves somewhere, statistically, most people find themselves basically central, somewhere in the center. And it was pretty cool because I read another great article, as that pendulum starts to swing wider towards ultra conservatism, populism, as populism changes, and then ultra progressive, ultra liberal, swinging further and further. It's not that the center gets wider and people get more tolerant. The center always stays about here, but the range of the extreme, the range of the division, the polarized opposite, that part is the part that gets wider. It breeds more division, actually, not more people coming together over, you know. So yeah, and that you're right. I think that's exactly right. That's the biggest challenge, I think, to them, to the Gen Z, I think, and the younger generations too. I mean, we're going to be living just I mean, if you think about what's happened just in the last 12 years, I mean, that the ripples of that, those transcend just one presidential term or one, Senate, or one House of Representatives, one Congress. It's way beyond that. And the,
Yeah.
the ripple down is going to be down into even below Gen Z, in my opinion. And yeah, that's a really good point. I think as they come of age, I think maybe there'll be more acknowledgement, more embracing, more development in that sphere. Our generation had to start a little bit younger because things like 9/11 and things like Columbine, as mentioned before, those things kind of made us grow up in a way pretty quickly. And the whole Afghanistan thing, the WMD Iraq thing. I mean, remember all that crazy shit? Like all of a
Oh,
sudden,
do I
I was
ever?
in, yeah, and then the recession and everything, and then it's just, I think we had to become very aware of a political stage and a global political stage, a lot quicker for a lot of those reasons. I mean, gosh, uh, we were in Afghanistan, what, 20 years? I mean, I can remember when we arrived there, and that now to see the exit 20 years later, and to see that things have gone basically back to how they were before we were there. It's kind of like, but I remember being as affected by it then as I am now. And
Yeah.
that's something my youngest brother just didn't really have to deal with. I mean, COVID, they were still pretty young during COVID. I mean, it affected kind of their college thing, for better or for worse. But yeah, I think maybe as they come of age, maybe yeah, that's a good insight. But
Well,
maybe we'll see.
and I also, the other reason I worry about them is you mentioned the generation behind them. I work with the
Mm.
generation behind them, and
Yeah.
I'm really worried about them. Because they
What they're
did,
calling alpha, is that right? Generation
yeah,
Alpha? Yeah.
yeah, and we'll see if that sticks. But yeah, the
Yeah.
Gen Alpha, they called them the I generation for a while, and then Gen
Oh.
Alpha seems to be the one that's sticking. But that group, I worry about a lot. They spend a lot of time isolated. They're not very community oriented. Most of their community is online. This is a generalization, obviously.
Hmm.
So a lot of kids buck this trend, but like, way more racist, way more homophobic, way more sexist than the last group. And it does have to do with the political
Mm.
class and the leadership that they see. I mean, this is a group that is growing up with under Donald Trump. This is a group that saw the president try to overthrow the government and then just nothing happened to him. And
Mm.
so I do worry about if Gen Z doesn't end up taking the reins leadership wise
Oh.
and have some
Yeah.
influence representation wise, right, on a
Hmm.
grander scale. I worry that it may do something similar to our generation where a lot of our generation
Hmm.
got skipped over. The boomers just never
Yeah.
died. And they just
That's
like
right. No, that's
kept
exactly right.
ruling, and
Yeah.
so
No, that's right.
I do worry about whether that happens. And then the next group that has
Hmm.
grown up in a world where they see these really high profile, high powered people just saying really awful things all the time and doing really awful things and not facing any consequences for it at all. And
Mm.
so I do worry about that group. And I don't mean to bring it down, but I just think that's why I hope that Gen Z finds their political footing because they have a
Hmm.
chance to make a
Hmm.
huge difference. It's a lot of pressure for them, but they also have a chance to make a huge difference and kind of change those narratives and maybe steer us toward a more just world.
Well, and maybe as the boomer generation sort of, steps aside more, and that's a really good point. And it makes me think, that their cultural impact. I mean, but you do kind of, you need both.
Yeah.
You need the political channels, you need that sphere, but then you need the cultural. And when you see those two things really aligned, is where you see great cultural and societal and governmental shift. And when you see them at odds, is when you see deep disruption. Like I'm thinking Vietnam, I'm thinking a little bit ahead of my time, but
Hmm.
it's certainly more of my time. The Iraq thing. I mean, it was just so divided. I mean, and we were the generation kind of like Alpha, and that we were kind of like you know, we didn't even know what to think about it
Hmm.
necessarily in that instance, but our culturally we're kind of in a shambles, and politically we're kind of in a shambles, and it never even found its footing as like a proper anti-war thing, which I was always kind of surprised by. I was always surprised that there wasn't some sort of cultural outcry, but I think there were, I think yeah, I guess the music, we adhered more to the cultural, the punk anthem, the grunge anthem. I think that's where we found our outlet. But yeah, we did miss the political thing, and we were aware of it. But you're right. I don't think we felt any way to really involve ourselves with it.
Yeah, the
I think is
levers,
what it was.
yeah, the levers of power weren't necessarily accessible to us. They were so entrenched in the boomer generation and have been for
Hmm.
our most of
Hmm.
our lives, like because some of those guys were young. I mean, George W.
Yeah.
Bush was a
Yeah.
young president, and
Yeah.
Obama was a young president, even though I would think of him as an example of his leadership, and I have plenty of criticisms of him, but the way he carried himself
Hmm.
as a good example of why Gen Z, who grew up under him, comports themselves a little bit differently. There's a style that I think is to some extent tied to when you see political leaders, whereas the next group, there's a style that is tied to the political leaders that they're growing up with. And it
Yeah.
is really interesting to see in real time now that I've been teaching for so long, because I see these kids grow up and then become adults. And so like some of it's pretty predictable,
Yeah.
like I could have
You can
predicted.
see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I could have predicted that your
Yeah.
brother was going to be cool, even though I didn't know your brother, right? Like
That is wild.
I saw that coming.
I never knew. I never.
Yeah,
One day you just started listening to good music, like a switch got flipped. I was like, Julian, what?
yeah, they're so cool. Like I and
Yeah,
and yeah, it is, but I
that's
can
so
see,
cool.
yeah, I can see the next group though, and I'm just saying
Uh,
we need some
that's well.
leadership because I'm
I'm
worried
glad
about the
that
next
those.
group.
Well, I'm really glad that this analysis is making out over the airwaves in a music podcast, but because that
Yeah.
ties in on a couple different levels. But man, shout out to teachers because teachers are the only front line because the government right now, certainly government right now, and all of these corporations, they don't care at all. They're just trying to figure out, all right, we got these little kids coming up, how are we going to sell them more shit they don't need? How are we going to
Yeah.
control them? How are we going to psychologically manipulate them? That's how they're thinking. The only people trying to be like, hey, these guys could be in for, it's almost predictable, these guys are in for some real trouble, if XYZ, those are the teachers. Those are the teachers, I think. So shout out to good teachers. My life has been shaped, as most people's have, by the good teachers, and gosh, even in music. But this is making me think
Yeah.
of this, if you'll humor me. This is
Yeah.
this is something I wrote here, and without knowing it, I'm kind of connecting the dots on this generational gap and kind of being aware of these bigger forces in as much as we can. I mean, I feel like you have a very precise, you're able to kind of surgically get in because being a teacher, seeing the kids, seeing them grow up, seeing the generations, I'm kind of getting it from a sense of just kind of just broader, just kind of subtle sniffs in the air of kind of what it is, and usually after the fact. For me, it's always kind of
Hmm.
retroactive, but it is comforting to know there's nothing I could have done differently to have positioned myself, and that's not even the right part of the brain thinking. We're just supposed to. The grace thing becomes more important. We're just supposed to operate and move through in those moments, living in the present with as much grace as possible, forward and backward in our own lives. And we can't be trying to use to I'm not Bezos or Elon Musk trying to be like, well, if I all these little minutia, all these concatenations, all these little things, if I control them, I can set myself to be really successful in solar based cars or shit based music. It's like that. That's not it. Life isn't this chess game for me. Life is this kind of flowy dance where it's like I'm just glad I get to be here. But yeah, I do now. I feel like the activist in me now is being activated, and now I'm like, gosh, we gotta help these kids.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I don't know if this record or these poems are gonna help. I know your podcast is gonna help, but I don't I don't know if anything I do. Hopefully, the impetus behind what I do is true enough, though, and yeah, that goes back to that. It's like if
Yeah.
I'm doing true and I'm trying to fight that good fight, then yes, hopefully it connects. And even if one person from that generation picks up a record or hears a poem or listens to podcasts and like, oh. And then they start to just become aware and it plants a seed. I mean, that's, as being a teacher, that's where it happens. And that's where governments in the past have used it for ill. Uh they've attacked curriculums, they've attacked cultural curriculums, they've attacked the young minds because they know, and I feel like intentional or not, standardized testing, the public education system when you and I were growing up, it's like there's a lot of bad. I think the bad probably outweighed the good, and a lot of just the mantra of what those things were at the time. Talking again about the failed sort of social experiment of this, like everyone go to college all at once, and that's your key to happiness. It's like, yeah, we're all sort of bought and sold on that kind of failed dream. But anyway, this is called Granite of Endless Potential. All hail Caesar, even Caesar. All must die. So few truly live. This is granite of endless potential. I inherited little but the sorrow of those by whom I entered, but it needed somewhere to reside. I barely remember myself until a certain age, and even then I'm a little out of focus, all of me having occurred in a dog's dream. You were there, and so was everyone else you'll ever know. It was your Jason. Did I lose you? Oh, I
Yeah, I
should close
lost you
my.
for a second. You
I think we had stranded on the parapet of the conception of the
not.
birth of all that was holy. I think that's where we lost you.
Yeah, I think we
Let me
cut
get
out
this.
before then.
Well, let me back it up a stanza and let me
There you go.
plug my phone in. That's actually a good reminder. Go.
Is this a book of your
Yeah.
poetry? Like, or is this a
This is
compilation?
a book of poems. Yeah. There's a
Yeah,
book of some
cool.
poems here. And hope you don't mind the change of the view, but that way
No,
the
it's okay.
charger can.
Whatever works better, yeah.
The smart coffee cup is now a phone well, monopod, tripod, holder,
Unipod.
unipod, sippable unipod. No AI involved. Have you noticed? Have you noticed, especially with creative things now, that anytime you do anything, there's this kind of minute disclaimer, which I've sort of, focused in on and kind of see the significance. But there's a little checkbox you have to do now with everything that was AI involved in the creation of dot dot dot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because it's like this little toothpick dam, trying, standing against, the Hoover Dam crushing open and and this water about to flood the valley. It's like,
Uh,
first of all, no one probably could even tell the difference in a lot of cases. And for example, saying I played you a record of popular style music, which I think is the easiest target because it is sort of just flattened out.
yeah.
And you're like, wow, that's cool, so that's pretty catchy, and yeah, it's fun. I'd be like, wow, yeah, it's a good song. But then when I was like, a human didn't even make that; it was just a computer program. I mean,
Mm.
most people wouldn't even know or care, and it wouldn't necessarily change their opinion of it. But it's all across every sector. It's not just music. Music, I think, it has been very easy for it to replicate, which is kind of sad if you think about it. But it could AI could never replicate Muddy Waters or Nina Simone or necessarily Beethoven, right? Certainly not,
Yeah.
you know. But what if it someday it does? That I just think that little tick box is going to go away, and it's just going to. But here's the crazy thing, and this is the part that I have kind of started to imagine. It's not just that it's replacing humans making music or bands or filmmakers. It's there's already so much out there because of technology, because of platforms, how cheap and free and easy it is to blast stuff out. I just think, imagine the scope of just all the stuff that's out there already saturating the airwaves. But yeah, I just think, I think we might eventually just see that little tick box disappear. And I just think there's going to be we already think there's so much out there, and there is music, uh, movies, TV shows, ads, shopping sites, websites, social media platforms. There's so much of this stuff. But imagine
Hmm.
if imagine if AI just cranks up production. All of a sudden, you go on Spotify tomorrow, and okay, all the new releases from human bands or just whatever made by bands. Maybe it doesn't even say that. But then, wow, there's 6 million other new tracks today, and they're all just basically indiscernibly pop music or whatever they can replicate.
Well, I
That's
saw.
that's the part that's crazy to me because we already thought that everything of anything that was different or interesting, we already thought that was getting boxed out. But imagine that. Imagine you go to upload a song on Spotify or whatever, and it's just like no more uploads are possible. It's completely maxed out. And then you go to but I mean, that's everywhere, everything. It's just like completely boxed out. You go to Bandcamp, but AI is like, oh, the servers are completely maxed out. We can't accept any more new Bandcamp or SoundCloud these are small players compared to Apple and Spotify. But imagine if there's literally no more real estate to putting anything out there that's not generated artificially. It
Well,
has that capability.
yeah, I'm almost weirdly okay with that because I think what it will do is people will still crave the genuine thing and it will force us back to physical media in a major way. And I do think when we were talking about Gen Z before, like they have very much got back to physical media. I
Yeah,
mean, I was at my local record store today and in Orlando, people don't think of Orlando as a music city other than pop music. We've got a really cool scene here, live music scene.
cool.
Yeah, and then the record stores here are always busy. Like I go to Park Ave CDs
Ah,
today, middle of the day on a Tuesday, and you got to kind of brush past people and in this beautiful,
wow,
and it's been around since the '90s. So like I
that's cool.
and a lot of the folks in there were Gen Z age.
Hmm.
So I'm pretty optimistic about that. Like that, even if AI does what you're predicting, that like I still think people are going to want the genuine thing, and that's one
Hmm.
thing I am optimistic about is that I do think people want physical media and are kind of going in that direction. Now, getting
People
the
will find a
word
way.
about it, right? That especially as an independent artist, it's expensive to press vinyl. Getting the word out about it, that kind of thing. But they love CDs too, man. Like
Yeah, I've heard about this resurgence in CDs because people value that it's the highest quality digital sound uh format. And I honestly don't know if I can always tell the difference they say MP3s are downgraded formats and this and that. But we're also just listening to music. I mean, how often do we just hold the phone up to our ear, or it's like, it's
yeah.
just a kind of just unidirectional kind of little Bluetooth. I mean, even the quality of headphones, the I'm not a hi-fi guy, but I understand enough about the trajectory since, digital. But like a lot of the headphones and stuff, they're not really full range. They tie into what's the degraded music formats are, and it's just it's a lot of bass, it's a lot of high end, it's a lot of it's not when you listen to a vinyl record with even just a decent pair of speakers, you're getting a whole different sonic experience. It's a whole different just everything. And it's interesting, a world where both can exist and be desirable. And I think that's the culminate. I think that's the apex of what Gen Z, the fact that they're able to incorporate all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, vinyl. There's a statistic that vinyl has outsold CDs, which you know isn't that crazy because they're not even selling cars with CD players. I don't think anymore. And I don't even have a CD player. I don't. I think a lot of people do. I remember the little what is it, Discman, and
Uh-huh.
it's like you had to you couldn't jog with it. You had to just hold it like this, otherwise it would
Yeah.
skip. But we've come a long way, and it's just interesting that an older technology, vinyl, is more successful than the highest digital type of physical media or digital playback period.
Mm-hmm.
It's just interesting that wow, we've gone back decades before to something that has shown some longevity and merit in its staying power, and a lot of that ties into when they were when they were really pressing records, 60s, 70s, I mean 50s too, but widespread people having players, 60s, 70s. That was also a lot. There was kind of a technological revolution taking place in studios. I mean,
Mm.
the best mics, the best reel-to-reel tape machines, all that outboard gear, tube stuff. I mean, the 70s, mid 70s, that's where it really reached that high point of I think just perfectly giving you music. If apart from seeing it live, and I think part of why it has lasted and why it was so good, is that it kind of gave you a little bit of that live thing. It's like when you hear, and the tubes are warm and the band is on, the mics are good, it's a real performance, it's real songwriting. It's like that's the live thing. That's part of the live thing traditionally. I mean, there's other aspects. It's much more diverse than that, but vinyl is able to analog, but especially vinyl is able to give us a lot of that back. And I think it's really encouraging that that's still of high value enough so that vinyl was on the rise again. I think it's a good sign.
I
It's a good
agree.
indication.
I mean, my other podcast is a celebration of vinyl, Life's Greatest Hits. That's
Oh,
that's the whole
cool.
thing, you know. We
Oh,
listen to a record and then we talk about it, and it's just super
oh,
fun.
dude, you got to
Um,
get me on for that one. And do
oh,
you
I'd
know this?
love that.
Do you know that?
Uh-uh.
Dude, this is a great vinyl
Okay.
right there. Demis Roussos. He was like Elvis, but just not in America, like Greece and Turkey. He was huge, and man, this is a great. I mean, bouzouki on there, Moog synthesizer, flutes. I mean, it's just the whole. This is a French. No, this is a French Canadian pressing, and I can't remember what the year on this is. But man,
Nice. All
this kind
right.
of yeah, that you'll enjoy that.
Cool. I'll look
But
into it.
uh, if the connection's good, should I finish reading this just so? Or yeah,
Yeah,
it's
please
okay.
do.
It could be half a
Yeah.
poem. That could be kind of cool.
Yeah. Go for it.
Well,
Please.
uh, and here the tie I'm making here is, we're we're seeing the world change, and music can reflect that. It's not often used for that purpose anymore, and it's sad. I mean, are we just traditionalists? Are we just longing for the good old days, or is it some of that, and is some of that okay? But are we also seeing the things like the vinyl, the things that matter, persisting and fighting for them to persist and creating space for them to persist, knowing that maybe, yes, maybe they haven't been squashed completely, but knowing that they could get somewhat squashed or squashed completely, maybe not in our lifetime, but if we don't hold space for these things, if we don't make the vinyl record, if we don't appreciate the vinyl record, if we don't have these conversations, if we don't make these
Mm.
albums, it's like it's. I mean, I always feel, and this is just I guess that's how I was raised. My parents were sort of catastrophe experts. They were big on Y2K, and we've sort of lived through we lived through a massive wildfire that destroyed our town. We lived through a Category 4 hurricane. We've done all this stuff, but I think that makes you tough, but it also makes you realize how fragile it is, and it kind of makes you a little
Yeah.
bit wary of the world ending. And my dad was also a evangelical Christian, very strict. So there's always this end times narrative, but yeah, it's like we're seeing the world change, but I think yeah, each of us has responsibility to it, beyond just our keep our own house in order, but the things we put out there, and it ties into that. But yeah, it's scary to think that if we don't, I always feel like we're always under threat of our human soul extinction, I guess is how I could describe it. But
Mm,
this poem is about being our age or our generational ilk-ish, and kind of the things that we came to terms with, and the chances that we had as a result. And then this other one is kind of the uh, it's kind of 20 years later.
mm,
So we start. Okay, it was your standard cortege stranded on the parapet of the conception of the birth of all that was holy in the spring of the year of the wood snake. It was less luminous than we envisioned, but the ballast held true. No one can take the resolve of your forebears from the archival record. Who would try? But if you were not there in the dog's dream, then I mistook you by or for your shadow. When you grow into it, it may still become you. It has its space to occupy and occur, as does your light, wherever it may have gone.
mm,
So that's kind of,
mm,
back when I was 20, and then this is now 20 years later,
mhm,
a poem entitled, I Do Not Choose My Hours. I spend half my life with my eyes closed, but then again, two-thirds awake. I do not choose my hours. I hardly reckon them. I temper the air best I can before I must take it within. And still am I uncertain how it moves through me, and I through it. Don't count this moment could ever return. How often have you been left standing at the railing? They let the young die ahead their time and left us old to mourn the loss and curse at no one with a face. So I close my eyes more, not so the dreaming may begin, only so that it may continue.
mm, mm.
I
Man.
love this. I love this breakdown of the generations because, yeah, there's tidal shifts happening, man. It's just so encouraging that you're on the front line and you're aware of it. And gosh, I mean, I'm just getting a really big like shot of vitamins in my soul vein. It's like, man, I don't know what I was so worried about. I mean, part of my character is to be worried, which creates
Yeah.
the angst and the fire to create these things. But gosh, this is a moment of deep encouragement. Knowing that, yeah, thinking about Gen Z, thinking about teachers, dedicated people, just soul people, to think about the uptick in vinyl sales. And I like to imagine these young kids are listening to vinyl and they're just getting it. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
explained to them, but it's like a voice across the ages, and they instantly see through all the bullshit. And it's a moment of transparency. And yeah, I guess it gives me some hope, and that's not a message I usually include with with anything I do, because that's not, I mean, I kind of envision myself as like a system of a down with a piano sort of, but
Yeah,
because they were
that makes sense.
well, they were so weird, and it was
Yeah.
so over the top, and it was so the pageantry of these characters that they would create, and just the off-putting sound. But man, to me, it was the gospel. It was. I really just took all that in, and I
Mm,
think that was. I think I try to attain to that same level of intensity. That
mm,
energy,
mm,
especially live. But I really just value and respected what they did. And thankfully kind of this comparison of generations, we did have a good cultural moment for a second there. And we were aware of the political stage. We didn't really have the inroads necessarily for external reasons. But then, so I think a lot more of that got channeled into, like Rage Against the Machine, some of the Radiohead stuff. I mean, it drove it into the cultural landscape, and we absorbed it. And I think this is me reflecting it back at maybe a time of alignment where, yeah, maybe someone in Generation Alpha hears it in the next 10 years, and it just aligns with something, and they're like, oh, this explains a lot, without them ever knowing that they were in your class and you saw it all unfolding before them with your understanding, at your age, of past, present, and future. And but they'll hear that record or a record like it, or they'll read a poem, or something will, and they'll and they might it might like we're saying, plant that seed, but that seed might grow into pushing them towards whatever that is. Maybe they start reading about American history. They start reading about governmental history. They start, they look at uh, you know political science. All of a sudden that's on that. Oh well, let me take a class on that, and that's and maybe that builds into something else. And with that, they meet other people, and then the foments the beginnings of a loose community, and they start all sort of meeting in the middle through the beautiful art of communication, sharing terminology, sharing vocabulary, sharing ideas, and then painting each other pictures in each other's brains that just somehow pull out and give life and breath to these nebulous feelings that are just vying and fighting inside of their souls to come out and make a difference, to make a change, to just shape one part of the world in a way where they see it could improve. And
Mm-hmm.
they know that they could. They need the tools, they need the impetus, they need the champions, they need the prophets, they need the poets, it's got to start with the music, it's got to start with the art. They need that behind them to give them the framework, to give them a place to divest of those feelings. And then you go out with the community and you start to put, it turns into carpentry. It goes from that
Mm-hmm.
one ounce of inspiration and the 99 gallons of sweat, perspiration, to make it. But that's how it always happens all throughout history. We know that's how it happens. So that, or people get pushed too far. People get pushed too far, it becomes a violent moment of desperation. I mean, it could be a bit of both.
Yeah, it could be a bit of both. And I think that's one of the things that we have to be mindful of right now is like getting through this present moment so that there is a world in which, and again, I don't
Mm.
want to drop it all on their doorstep, right? We have a responsibility also to make sure that we are helping to guide and to set the example. I mean, I think about like, we're talking about responsibility in art earlier. I consider that I have a responsibility both through the podcast and my writing, as well as a teacher, to make sure that I'm putting forth, like I'm setting the example by consuming really important
Mm.
art and art that I think makes a difference. I want to spread the word about your records. I mean, I want people to get there. There you go, publicists and managers. We're back to the records.
Shout
I
out.
I do want an hour and a half in.
Yeah. Someone
I,
keeps someone keeps pressing the back button. They're like, wait, they said this was about a record, right?
but I know especially when I listen to Requiem Mass, like, and your self-titled is so wonderful too, man. What a great record. I've been spending a lot of time with that. That came out earlier this year. You've been putting out a lot of really great stuff. And it's kind of amazing
Thanks,
to me to
man.
think about, like, it's been 2 years since we spoke, 2 years
Yeah.
tomorrow, and you've just put out all this wonderful art since then. But I do think I have a responsibility to have that stuff playing, to encourage people to listen to it. When I am teaching, any opportunity I have for kids to read, I usually do this thing, reading workshop, especially when I teach English,
Mm,
where we just have like
cool.
dedicated time to where they read whatever they want to read.
Oh my
And
gosh.
then
Yeah.
I usually bring my book that I'm reading with me, and I have a little
Cool.
synopsis of it with the cover posted up in the room. And then I read it with them, and then we like do a reflection, and I do the reflection on the board so they can see my thought process
They see
while
the
they're reading.
process.
Yeah. So
Wow.
like that's important to me, because then I'm demonstrating, you're modeling how to write, but also like I want them to see this is what I actually do. Like if I was at home right now, I would be reading and reflecting, right? Like I genuinely do that. And I want you to see that, and I want you to,
Yeah.
see that example. So I do think that there's a responsibility we have, but also that if we can get through this moment, there is a glimmer of hope that sometimes I
Hmm.
don't feel. This morning I was having a conversation with a friend about how how beat down I am. The
Mm.
president threatened to arrest Mondami.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, what
Yeah.
the fuck are we doing, man? Like
Yeah.
today, he threatened to arrest him for nothing. And that's a pretty scary moment that we're in. But if we can get through it, that there is some glimmers of hope, I think, on the horizon. But
Well,
man,
it's
this is
interesting because you and I think I love what you're saying, but because I don't know about you, but we grew up without anyone modeling anything for us, and I'm not
Mm.
crying out saying, oh, it's so unfair. I knew we're talking big external forces at play in across multiple generations, and some of it's quite frankly not, it's hard to see, how we could have changed it, or we weren't even aware of it.
Jesse Daniel Edwards, y'all. Thank you so much, Jesse. Thank all of you for listening. JesseDanielEdwards.net for all things Jesse Daniel Edwards. The song you are hearing in this episode is Biting Off the Hand That Feeds from his record Requiem Mass. Scoop up a copy over on the website. While you're there, grab his self-titled album that came out earlier this year and his EP, his other EP, Catechism on Mass. Y'all, great songs. What a fascinating guy. MarinadePodcast.com for all things The Marinade. Follow us on all the socials. We're even back on Facebook, y'all, and I'm honestly having fun with it. So add me as a friend, follow The Marinade, do all the things. Subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast app. Tell a friend about the show. These are free ways to support The Marinade, and go do that right now while you're listening, please. It makes a big difference for us and costs so little of your time and energy. Also, please follow Life's Greatest Hits on all the socials. We're most active over on Instagram. That's where my show with my dear friend Jordan Foley can be found. Updates on the show can be found. We are 12 episodes deep now. The latest episode, we had a special guest, Mr. Tyler Hood, who plays guitar in Jordan Foley's band, The Wheelhouse, and his dear friend of ours. We sat down and listened to Snipe Hunter by Tyler Childers, and we listened to it on the Sunday after it came out, and we each promised that we wouldn't listen to it until the three of us were listening together for the first time. And we did. We made good on that promise. Really great feedback on the episode so far. So check it out, y'all. Make sure you're following us. If you really like this Marinade thing, please consider joining our Patreon community. Just $2 a month, y'all. You can gain access to Patreon exclusive content, like our show Jason's Journey, where I talk about the moments that shape my creative life and provide a window into the process of making the Marinade. If you've ever been curious about the Patreon, just try a free trial, y'all. No pressure. Try it for 7 days. Set a reminder on your phone in case you want to cancel, but I don't think you will. Keep going if you dig it. Also, if you don't care for Patreon, I'm working on posting all the same content over on Substack. Apparently, Substack's been kind of controversial lately, so I'm going to dive a little bit more into what the controversy is all about. But from what I've gathered so far, it's not anything that, I don't know, is going to drive me from the platform. If you know more than I do, or if you feel like, hey, that's not the place to be, buddy, please feel free to send me a DM or email me, marinadepodcast@gmail.com. That's always open. We really appreciate it. Pick your preferred platform, Substack, Patreon, support the show. If you want to support us financially, but you don't want to commit to a monthly subscription, I totally get that too. You can Venmo or PayPal us. It's just at The Marinade. Y'all, Bonnaroo for 3 years in a row. Orange Blossom Review. These things happen because of the generosity of our listeners. I'm so excited and grateful for everybody who listens, though. Thank you. We're coming up on 8 years, okay? 8 years. Just about a month from now. The 7th, I believe, of September is the anniversary of episode 1 with BJ Barham. And so many of y'all have been here since the beginning. Thank you. If you're new, thank you. If you came on board 2, 3, 5 years ago, thank you. I feel like we keep getting better. We keep bringing more people in, and I'm just grateful. So until next time, go out and create something. Cheers, y'all.